ETH getting ready to hit an all-time high. We'll take a look at Fed rate cuts. It's going to be a banger. My name is Paul Barron. Welcome back into the show. I do want to thank our sponsor today, and that is Coinbase. This is where you guys can get started on your crypto journey, and maybe this is your first step into crypto. Well, join it by going over and visiting Coinbase.com. You can, of course, get into the future of money, whether you're a business or an individual. Coinbase has got you set up. A couple of things you can do within that if you have not already started to check this out. A lot of opportunities, including lending against your Bitcoin. So if you have Bitcoin inside there, did you guys know you can lend against it? Check it out over at Coinbase.com. Use our link. It does help the channel. Let's get into a couple of points right now. Of course, the biggest issue is the Fed rate cut. If you take a look at Polymarket right now, holding at 88% right now, this is insane for the potential around the September rate cut, even though I'm still anticipating that we may get a surprise. And people are now starting to actually talk about that surprise, and that would mean a 50 basis points cut. Now, if you guys remember, we talked about this earlier in the week, around 5% is where it was. So we've had a little bit of an uptick just here recently. There's been a lot of reasons why that is occurring, but one of the key things that I think the Fed is starting to look at is the stickiness of inflation, meaning it's holding right now and it's not necessarily responding to what's happening in the tariff side of things. I want to go over to a clip real quick because this is Scott Bessent asking for at least a 50% or a 50 basis point rate cut. Take a look.
There's a very good chance of a 50 basis point rate cut. They try to be more data driven, which I think is a mistake. You know, it's just very old fashioned thinking, but I do think we could go into a series of rate cuts here, starting with a 50 basis point rate cut in September.
A 50 basis rate cut in September, does that signal that the economy, though, is not doing well?
That signals that there's an adjustment. And if you look at any model, that we should probably be 150, 175 basis points lower. So probably one of the most politicized governors just went off the board.
What did she do that gave you that impression? I'd love to know.
Sorry?
I imagine you're referring to Governor Kugler. What did she do that gave you that impression?
I think there's a lot of inside baseball. It was hard to know whether, TDS was a Trump dementia syndrome or Trump derangement syndrome or tariff derangement syndrome.
Okay, so that's an interesting clip there, but the point being is that he's talking about 150 basis points. Now, what it would take to get to that by year end would be 350 basis points cuts in September, October, and December. That is insane. I think I don't necessarily see the Fed doing that. I think the key here, of course, though, rolling into 2026 is the fact that we do have a Fed chair that will start to position out of that role, and that being, of course, Chair Powell. That happens in May. So a lot is still brewing around where this economy could be going. Now, one of the things around Ethereum is how long have you held it? If you look at this tweet right here, if you held through April 2025, this is one of the darkest days. I would agree that is one of the darkest days. If you go back and look at our ETH videos back during that period of time, look at the bottom that happened in April of this year. This is the kind of narrative that we've been talking about with ETH. Everybody was saying, including myself, that was just exhausted by ETH, exhausted that it wasn't moving, continuing to see a downtrend. And I think this is something, though, that many of us were at least lucky enough. I won't say luck because you're a legend, as they say right now. If you held through that period of time, you definitely knew what you were doing. And I think this is the key right now because we are nearing in to an all-time high. And the question is what happens after that. Now, many people are now starting to forecast that Ethereum could hit $25,000. This is coming in from Standard Charter. Now, I want to take that with a grain of salt, guys, because there's a lot within this. If you look at what Nate's saying here is that these, everybody remembers these, okay? Remember? Everybody was pitching this. That same Standard Charter right there. That's in March that ETH is going to go 4,000, all right? Then you go further into this. Let's go into this analyst predicting a 20% price crash below 2K. Here's why. Then you go into that one, the death cross for 2022, ETH price crash. So this is the scenario that has been playing out for ETH for a long time. Finally, ETH has its day in the sun. It's going to see an all-time high, I think, in just maybe a matter of minutes. We'll take a look at the charts here in a second. But I do want to go to another clip, and this is interesting because it's Cathie Wood's and how she is moving into the ETH ecosystem through these ETH treasuries. Take a look.
It was very, very difficult for us to gain a position in our ETFs to Ether. There are all kinds of problems. There are tax issues, fee issues. There's something called bad income. If those gross profits are more than 10% of the total profits generated in a year, the entire fund can be shut down. You'll lose a lot of tax benefits, great number of fines, if not actual shutting down. So we can't take those risks. And as you can tell, I'm not deep into tax law, and I'm not going to be able to explain exactly what, who, what, when, where, why, and how. I just listened to our trading team, our compliance team, our finance team, and I say, okay, I can't go there. It's just, I can't do it. So this is the first time we've been able to gain a position in Ether. Sure, it comes at a premium. There's just more utility. The ETFs, at least not yet, are not allowed to stake.
All right, well, I think a couple of points to hit on that. What she's talking about is exposure to ETH via these funds through publicly traded companies. These are treasury companies that are holding treasuries against their MNAV, basically their value against what they're holding as Ethereum. But many, of course, are starting to build ecosystems around that. I think that is going to be the growth mechanism. Tom Lee, of course, is the one she's representing there right now, and that's BMNR. Bitmine, but we've also seen BTCS, Sept, which is Sharplink Gaming. All of these have started to move in this direction. And I think if you look at what they're having to do on Wall Street, basically jump through a lot of hoops and loops to get this done. But everybody else, like you and I, have been able to do something already, and that is stake your ETH. But if you did that, if you were staking ETH is now outperforming Bitcoin by 900 basis points year to date, just on a staking compound. Remember, staking ETH continues to add more ETH to it, which ends up compounding on those gains, which is what you're seeing right now. This is a big deal because I think this is starts to play into maybe a strategy that a lot of people might look at long-term holding of Ethereum or other assets out there that you can stake. And the real question is how do we go from staking into things like vaults, other DeFi plays? We're going to get into that for you guys because there's a lot happening in that space. This is an interesting statement right here. It takes 4.27 more capital to move Bitcoin the same percentage as ETH. So think about that. 4 times the amount of capital to move Bitcoin in the same percentage that we're seeing happening in ETH right now. And look at the inflows right now in those ETFs. 523 million, this was yesterday, on ETH against Bitcoin at 66 million. So very interesting times right now. We're in a very unusual moment, I think, in the market right now because narratives are starting to shift. Now, the ETH narrative has been playing out, but the ETH ecosystem hasn't completely played out to its fullest. And the reason I say that is because of so many different things that are happening right now. You've got stablecoins occurring at the same time as treasury companies. You've got, of course, the Genius Act all starting to play out in a regulatory front. And then you have traditional finance starting to discover Ethereum for the first time. And I think this is what continues to push us in this direction. This is Cathie Wood's also saying, hey, I'm going to sell a little bit of my Solana for ETH. Take a look.
Had a very heavy weighting in Solana until recently. And, we made a very good move at a good time as Ether started to outpace Solana. I know that Solana was doing much better, at a massive run relative to Ether. People were challenging that notion, and yet we're seeing the votes being placed, and it makes sense. Ethereum, higher cost and a little slower. It's more decentralized and therefore more secure. Solana, we think, is probably going to be the winner in more consumer-facing applications. So we put out something called Bitcoin Monthly. It's probably going to be Bitcoin bi-monthly. Then we're going to layer into the alternative months, Ether, Solana, and we're watching layer 2s, of course, as well.
All right, so she said a lot there. Some of the key things here, and I'll give you my opinion on ETH versus SOL right now, because there's a lot of different strategies, and it also depends on where you were at in the buying cycle. And if you look at Arthur Hayes, he's out there now on record coming in for, and will be in the advisory committee, I should say, for Upexi. And this, of course, is a Solana treasury company. And the idea was selling ETH for Solana. Now, the concept right now is ETH nearing 5,000, Solana now just clipping over 200 bucks as we record this today. The real question you have to ask yourself is, first of all, where did you buy both those assets? If you're in both of those assets, you may want to say, okay, I'm just going to hold both. That could be a strategy. The other route, of course, you have to look at and say, is Solana from here, from $200, is that a 2x from where we are today? And versus ETH, is that a 2x from where we are today? And this may be a conviction for you in terms of just the kind of investing style that you guys are going into. But if you look at short term, Solana probably is the better play in terms of the gains that you'll maybe look at in the next 90 days. If you're looking long term, then Ethereum's probably the better play, because we're going to see and continue to see a lot more involvement from Wall Street. And I think that's the factor that is getting overlooked here in terms of how the market is playing out. Listen, right now, if you're in crypto and you've been here for more than a year, guys, you are essentially into the club. You have been there in very dark times prior to last year's election when things were not looking good in crypto. Obviously, that is a complete pivot going forward, and I think that's the thing that everybody has to remember. Now, what she did say is layer 2s. Now, layer 2s, you could start to look at a variety of different projects out there. We're going to get a video out for you guys to kind of break down some of the ones that we're watching. One, though, to keep an eye on is Optimism. Now, this, you could kind of go Arbitrum, Optimism, and we've talked about both of which have some interesting points. If you look at what alt layer's getting into, this is the interesting part right here. Because if you look at it, Optimism, Arbitrum, all of these are in a potential right now of a position where we are going to see a narrative start to play out. Now, when ETH hits 5K, and it will, let's get to the all-time high. If it does start to hit 5K, that is a psychological effect on investors in a big way. Now, there's two things that could happen. You're going to have some investors that have been around in ETH for a long time, and they're just going to hold forever. And then you're going to have investors that have not been around for a long time. Maybe they bought at 3,500 when we started to see that really aggressive move. Maybe they bought at 1,500. Whatever it might be, the key is, what is your expectation on Ethereum long term? And I think that's where we'll start to see things start to move. One other narrative to consider right now, because I think a lot of people are trying to figure out, well, if the ETH narrative does start to fade and it's more of a long term, because we may get 6 months or 8 months worth of sideways action. And it also could be a scenario where we get just, a crash through 5K and ETH starts to do a lot of discovery. But one of the narratives that you'd have to look at is going to be tokenized treasury stocks. And I think that's something that we've started to see movement within the Solana ecosystem. I would say they're somewhat the leader, not necessarily the only one that's going to be doing this, but definitely right now in place to be an early stage mover. And that, of course, gets you into narratives. And if that is a narrative that could leap from here, that could be the next play. And of course, the Solana ecosystem, a lot of activity there. If you take a look at the charts real quick, I'll just go up and take a look at Ethereum right now, holding as we record at 47.22. And not bad, because sentiment is holding pretty solid right now on our own trading signal, which has been very solid on the sentiment tracking. So if you guys are not part of the Diamond Circle, get in on that. Occasionally I'll drop things like this chart right here where we'll talk about sentiment. It also is one of the things that we've continued to look at. Bitcoin trading at 121, starting to crack in. Might get a shot at its all-time high. This is the highest close ever in the history of Bitcoin. So a lot happening with Bitcoin. And then if you take a look at Solana, right there, two big green candles on the daily after it has reclaimed $200K, or excuse me, $200. I'd love it, reclaim $200K, $200. And I think the key here with Solana, again, is how does it respond when it starts to near this kind of all-time high potential? And when we look at that around almost $300, is Solana set for a $400 position? If we see tokenized treasuries coming into the narrative, maybe that is the case. As I said, if you're not in the Diamond Circle, get in right now. It's a great place to get additional content from us. It's an email that comes out to you, gives you updates, additional research. Sometimes I'll drop in sentiment stuff in there. All of that is available for free. Just click the link down below. Follow me on X, @Paul Barron. I'll catch you next time right here on The Paul Barron Show.